Hello there. This is Samuel Reynolds from unlockastrology.com. And this is the last video of my series for Goal Full Circle, Flip the Table, a way of understanding or at least being able to read and identify aspects of a natal chart. Be sure to get the PDF that I will have attached for these videos, and the PDF will feature a legend for a particular chart, but you can use that same or those same set of legends to read your own natal chart, especially the one you get from astro.com. They'll be the same, as the glyphs are mostly the same almost universally, with some minor changes like I mentioned in another video. I think it was video 3 or 2 for Pluto, because Pluto has a different glyph with some astrology programs. I just want to recap something about houses before I talk about aspects. One key thing to be aware of, I was using the whole sign house system, which I mentioned is one of the oldest house systems. There's another house system that's comparable to the whole sign house system, which is the equal house system. But as I said, the most common one, which I restored here for Queen Elizabeth II, is Placidus. The thing to know is that when we're using Placidus, what can happen in a particular house is that we can have an intercepted sign with a quadrant house system like Placidus. What does that mean? It means that that particular sign is embedded in a house. So on the cusp of, let's say, Queen Elizabeth's first house is Capricorn, 21 degrees and 22 minutes. And again, that's where the wheel stopped. So as you saw with other videos, the circle keeps going, and then it may stop, or you may stop it at a particular point as it's going through 30 degrees of zodiacal longitude. That's the fancy way for saying as it goes through a sign, because in a sign, there are only 30 degrees. So it stopped just at the last 10 degrees, within the last 10 degrees of Capricorn for Queen Elizabeth II, when she was putatively, as we understand, born. But something interesting happened. What happened is that Aquarius was intercepted, if we're using Placidus, in that first house. So the planets that are in Aquarius, Mars and Jupiter, are also intercepted. A similar thing is happening for the Moon and Neptune in Leo in the opposite place, in what we call the 7th house. And again, just to clarify, the first is opposite to the 7th, and then the second is opposite to the 8th, the third is opposite to the 9th, the 4th, the 10th, the 5th, the 11th, the 6th to the 12th. And these, as you see up here, are the cusps for the various houses. So this is 1 degree of Capricorn and 5 minutes in Placidus for her 12th house. Again, for this particular video, it's not so much interpreting like, well, what does the 12th house mean? What does the 7th house mean? I might be able to get to that on another series and another set of videos, but this is just to like identify what are you looking at and how do you read it as versus a table. So the key thing to know here, one other thing that I wanted to point out, as some people may ask, like, well, some of the houses are empty, like the 3rd house here, 4th, 5th, 12th. Does that mean that the things related to those houses, for instance, when there are no planets, that there's nothing that's going to happen? No, not at all. So I'll give you an example without going too deep into interpretation. This is the 5th house. So the 5th house relates to children. There are no planets in this house, but Queen Elizabeth II did have children. So that doesn't mean by virtue of something empty in a house or having nothing in that house would suggest that nothing will happen in the life. Astrology is a lot more nuanced and complicated than that. So that's why it's important to learn how to read a chart. So let's get to what I also wanted to talk about, at least last are the aspects. Now, again, I can't get too deep into the interpretation of the aspects, but I can say at least what are they? In short, aspects are how planets are relating or looking at each other. Literally, that's the idea of aspectus in terms of being able to see. So all these lines that you see in the center relate to how the planets are able to behold each other. So there are different ways in which they behold each other, which creates either dynamic tensions or more reliefs or easy flow. Now, some people will say that these flows and these different tensions are good or bad. I would encourage you not to look at things in terms of just good or bad, because that's not how aspects really have to work. Just because, for instance, we can talk about what seems to be a flowing aspect, that may not turn out to be the best of things in someone's life. The other thing to know is that these different aspects are perceived as what we call hard, or called hard aspects, or soft aspects. So I'm going to go through what are the top ones, and I'll use some illustrations from Queen Elizabeth's because she has a good measure here, at least 3 out of them, but we can get into the other ones. So I'll start off with one that isn't an aspect at all, technically, and I'll go into why very briefly, is a conjunction. And there are 5, what we call 5 Ptolemaic aspects that we use commonly in astrology. There are more aspects than that. Some astrologers even call them minor, but really there's nothing minor about them. But I'll stick to the classic 5, at least for this video. The conjunction is both called an aspect because it's easy to say that, aspect, part of the 5. But technically it's not an aspect because you can imagine a conjunction symbolizing a point where someone's like literally right in your face, so close that you can't even fully breathe, and that's all you see is the face or an eye. Or it could be someone who's directly behind you and you can't see them. So this is where Mars and Jupiter are in conjunction with each other in Aquarius, 20 degrees, 22 degrees. Now, we can go into another time, well, how far can they be apart before they're not in aspect? That's called orb, but that's for another video. But this is one aspect which we would call the conjunction here. Then, directly on the other side of a conjunction is what we could call an opposition, where someone is on the opposite end of the room and seems to be challenging you, or that's what the planet perceives. Mars and Jupiter are opposed to Neptune, and also what we might say widely, but still, to the moon. So this is called an opposition. This is also deemed a hard aspect. Conjunctions are also called that, but that doesn't have to be, like, again, a pejorative, a bad thing. Here, the next thing we could talk about is a square, because we have it handy. We actually have 2 that we can see. This symbol here with the red, you see literally a square. Those are squares, meaning, and I'll clarify this is important, they have a 90-degree relationship to each other. So this is in Leo, this is in Scorpio, this is in Aquarius. The simpler way to say this is that these 3 are what we call fixed signs. Leo has a square or 90-degree relationship to Scorpio, as does Aquarius. But Aquarius has a 180-degree relationship, the opposition, to Leo. So that's why we have the opposition, why we have the square. But in contrast, we have something called the trine. The trine is where there's a flow of 120 degrees between the planets. So the trine is symbolized by a triangle because, as you can see, it can form what looks like the legs of a triangle. Illustration of this is Uranus has a trine being of the same element as Saturn in Scorpio. These are water signs. And I know that I didn't go into the quality of each of the signs, but again, that's more about interpretation. So I'm just giving you some idea of it. Here we have another trine, and this is between the North Node also to Saturn. And this again is listed as another trine because again, they're of the same element and near a similar degree. Again, one question would be, well, when are they not a trine and they become like something else? That's a question of orb. Orb all depends, and you talk to different astrologers and may give an orb of different magnitude and sizes. But again, that's another video. Here, I want to say one more thing is that we have a trine between Pluto and Venus because they're both the same element, water. Near in terms of degree, you can see 13 degrees is near to 12. And you might have seen a similar thing in terms of degrees, and that's why degrees are important in astrology, to figure out how close, far something is toward aspect or being able to behold the other. So Venus has this aspect to Pluto. Now, you may have counted like, all right, Sam, you did, the different aspects, but you said there were 5. You only did 4. Well, we don't easily find the other one here, so I'm going to let the chart move ahead. And I'm going to let it move ahead until we actually come across the thing we're looking for. And I might even let it go faster than a minute. I might let it go toward the hour and then stop it and see if we get toward what we call the sextile. And I don't see any sextiles really. There we go. Finally, a sextile emerged. So here we have a sextile. And what a sextile is pretty much 60 degrees between two planets. Jupiter at 23 degrees Aquarius and the moon at 23 degrees Sagittarius. And this is the symbol for the sextile, right? Because it has 6 points. That's an easy way to remember it. 60 degrees, 6 points. So that's kind of one way in which to envision the sextile. So here's a simple way to understand the aspects as it's seen in a chart. One key dimension of why I prefer the dynamic of a wheel over tables, even sometimes an aspectarian, is that you can see the relationships in envisioning the planets like as if they were in a room looking at each other. It's harder for me to do when I'm looking at a table. Like almost immediately I can see the moon having this trine with Neptune. That's again because they're in the same, what we call element, both in fire signs. Moon is in Sagittarius, Neptune is in Leo. So we can see some dimension of how they're able to have a perspective. So I do imagine the planets as if in a room, like a big gala looking at each other. And maybe Mercury, as we see here, is having a square with Pluto. So we could say, as we might say in my culture, Black culture, Mercury is giving Pluto the side eye. So there's a way in which Mercury is side-eyeing Pluto here. So that's the square. So there's another kind of more subtle tension. But I don't want to get too much into now unpacking what these signs are and what these aspects are, because that could go into a whole different other video. But I hope this gives the rudiments of being able to look at a chart and with some practice, identify the parts of it, know where planets are. So you can tell an astrologer, for instance, we have a Jupiter and Mars conjunction in Aquarius, and it's in my 7th house, for example. But what does it mean? That we'll have to wait for another time. Thank you.